over to Carol so she can give her introduction on why she's running for governor.
Sure. So my name is Senator Carol Blood. I am actually currently serving in the Nebraska legislature. I'm on my second term, and I am born and raised in Nebraska. And to be really frank, the Nebraska that I grew up in was very different than the Nebraska that we have now. Growing up in Nebraska, and I grew up on a farm in central Nebraska, we really didn't care what your party was. We really cared more that you could do the job. And I can remember driving in off the farm, going to the coffee shop, having a cinnamon roll the size of your head, and chatting over coffee in the downtown coffee shop. And when people talked about politics, they talked about the policy and they talked about getting things done. I really never heard the words Republican or Democrat. I certainly never heard words like progressive, far right, far left. And I think that because 25, 30 years later, we've come to that, we've lost the ability to really come together to get things done. Because instead of talking about good policy, we've been overcome by rhetoric. And to be really frank, we contribute to it because we describe ourselves as progressive, as a far left individual. And I'm not saying we need to be embarrassed of who we are, because I am a proud Democrat. But what I'm saying is that we're giving them the tools to use against us. So whenever you hear me talk, you'll hear me say things like Nebraskans, friends, neighbors, because I am running because that's what I want to get back to. It was never my intent to run for governor. I was going to stop after I was done in the legislature. Prior to being in the legislature, I served 8 years on the Bellevue City Council, Nebraska's third largest city, which isn't saying much. And by the time the 8th or 9th candidate threw their hats in the ring, all I could hear was the same rhetoric. They were all playing out the same playbook, this us versus them narrative. And none of them were talking about solutions, how we were going to move Nebraska forward together. All they were talking about is what I call smoke and mirrors. Here's all these federal issues that I want you to be worried about, and I want you to be scared of. And I truly believe that the reason that candidates do that, and elected officials, is because if they keep you scared, if they do that trick where they have you look over here, they never have to solve the real problems that affect everyday Nebraskans or everyday citizens across the United States, residents across the United States. And so I decided that I wanted to be the adult in the room, and I threw my hat in the ring. Now, I can be really frank with you. I have been told that there's no way a Democrat's ever going to win a statewide race in Nebraska because we've not done so in over 20 years, but we have done so in the past. And I want to tell you the reason that the Dems don't win. One thing, Wes, I know there's two Wes's, but the Wes that I know will tell you is that I've won 4 times in a highly Republican area. And I always run my own campaigns. I don't hire campaign managers, which of course saves me money, but also who better to know what's going on in Nebraska than somebody who's born and raised here. And I have a rural urban connection that we've never really had in our candidates before. But I can tell you that we've run the numbers, and I'm not a sacrificial lamb. I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think I could win. And my opponent has millions. He spent almost $6 million in the primary. I can tell you that we can run an effective campaign on $500,000 or less because I know what I'm doing. So we have the ability for the first time. The last candidate only got 41% of the votes, but we've never had a candidate that has gone out in rural Nebraska the way we're tackling it. So our plan is to really shore up the Dems and get them out like it's a presidential year in Lancaster, Douglas, and Sarpy County, which are on the eastern end of Nebraska. And then all we need are 35% of the congressional district out west to have a win. 35%. So we're going to be eating an elephant, right? We're going to take a little here, a little there. We have paid canvassers at almost to the border out west. We have paid canvassers north, south. We're in there knocking on doors every single day. We have a great group of phone bankers. We don't hire outside organizations. Excuse my chimes in the background. We don't have outside organizations that do the work for us. Everybody that works for my campaign is a Nebraskan, and we pay them as close to a living wage as I can give them. Our canvassers make $20 an hour. Our phone bankers make $15 to $17 an hour. They get bonuses, and they can work as many hours as they want, and we pay them weekly. So we have a plan. We have a strategy. I'm running on 4 pillars. I know I told 5 minutes. Do I have time to talk about my 4 pillars? Okay. So I always like to be a good guest. So one of the things I always remember growing up is Republicans always ran on 4 pillars, and they were really good at it. It didn't matter if you were a dog catcher, if you're running for the Senate, what level you're running at, you always ran on the same thing. It was smaller government, lower taxes, family values, and support the military. And then around September 11th, really, if you look at the history of it, it all kind of changed. It became this us versus them narrative where we just hate each other. And both sides participated in it, but one side was better at it than we were. It took us a while to catch up to what was going on. And so one of the things I've done that is very unlike any of the people who've run in Nebraska for a statewide race is I have 4 issues that I'm running on, and there are sub issues that are under each of these key issues, these pillars. So I am running on education, infrastructure, prosperity for all, and that I believe everybody has the right to be well and feel safe. And so when I say those, there's multiple things, but I'll give you the Reader's Digest version for those of you that still remember the Reader's Digest. That's an old person's joke. So in education, I believe in a K through 14 education. We, like many other states, we have a workforce shortage. And the thing that drives me crazy about that is that if you read a newspaper, you watched the news 20 years ago, we were told baby boomers were aging out and that we were going to have a workforce shortage if we didn't do anything. I don't know about the other states, but now we're throwing money at the problem and it's too little too late. So we really need to do something now that's strategic and not costly. We can do that with a K through 14 education in Nebraska, allowing people to get a 2-year degree or certification in anything from welding or any other type of trade, truck driving, ag, and then they leave school with no debt, and they walk into a good paying job. Now, we in Nebraska, unlike other states, we don't fully fund our schools. We have something called the TIOSA formula, which causes our property taxes to be high. It's a really long discussion, which I won't get into, but we need to fully fund our schools and make sure that it's equitable and fair for all of our schools across Nebraska, which currently it is not. I also want to address universal child care, because I believe that if we want to slow down the pipeline to our prison system, our very overcrowded prison system in Nebraska, if we want to give children a chance in Nebraska, we need to find a way to do universal child care. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that under one of the other pillars. I believe in constantly contributing to our infrastructure in Nebraska. That also means broadband. Nebraska has made a lot of mistakes where they've thrown money at things, but they don't measure what they treasure. And so our first efforts at broadband, we're basically giving money to big companies with nothing to show for it. So in rural Nebraska, broadband's really important for a lot of reasons, not just communication, but of course for our schools, but also because that broadband can provide second income for our farmers. Now, we also have pockets in Lancaster and Douglas County, which again, the most populated areas and more urban, because I know we have people from other areas outside of Nebraska, where we have families that are lower income that don't have access to broadband as well. And that has to change. It's got to be equitable. Infrastructure is also important for our farmers. Ag drives our economy, as it does in many other states. And so our farmers have to be able to get from point A to point B, because if they can't do that, they can't make money, and then our state doesn't benefit. The third pillar is that I believe that everybody has the right to be well, feel safe. In Nebraska, our governor literally defunded the police. We have something called a law enforcement training center. It's out of Grand Island, Nebraska, which is in the center of the state. All but 3 of our agencies are trained there. Because the way that our governor has budgeted, which is cut, like he'll go to departments and say, I need you to cut 6%. as opposed to let's figure out what you need, when you're going to need it. There's no planning, there's just cutting. So we funded the law enforcement training center, but he asked them not to spend that money. And because of that, they didn't hire staff and they didn't upgrade the facilities. We had a long waiting list of law enforcement from rural areas not getting trained, which means they couldn't hit the streets, which created a safety issue. If you had 3 people in a small county working for the sheriff's department and only one of them can come to a call, that's a safety issue. We also, like other states, have a first responder issue where our first responders are aging out, and we need to find a strong pool of people, and the K through 14 education can tap into that, by the way, to come and work for our fires and police department. In our community, in my county, we had put together our own training academy because we couldn't wait for the state to do their jobs. And then it's also about mental health. We know that law enforcement, they're not psychologists. We need to broaden the ability for them to be able to take somebody to a safe location. Again, in my county, we're building our own facility because we can't wait for the state to do it. There's a lot of issues involved. But one of the concerns that I have is that when they do find a facility, if there is a bed open, what's going on is the person's there for 2 to 3 days. They're asked if they promised it. Do you promise you take your medication? And they're like, yes, I'll take my medication. And then they open the door and let the person back out on the streets, only to get involved again with law enforcement, or worse, in our prison system, which is not where they belong. Now, like other states, we have a shortage in healthcare workers. What just happened in the Supreme Court is certainly not going to help that issue. Here in Nebraska, we need to concentrate even more so on what's going on in rural Nebraska, because we have an issue where we've had to shut down medical facilities because, again, the state of Nebraska didn't do its job and didn't fully fund Medicaid reimbursement. And as a result, we actually had facilities that closed down in Nebraska. We need to make sure that we're constantly stepping up to the plate and not ever making that mistake again. But more so, again, we need to start growing our workforce and making sure that we have the healthcare out west in Western Nebraska that they really need, because it's created a secondary issue. They can't get the medical help they need, so they come to urban Nebraska. Urban Nebraska now has an overflow of patients. You can wait up to 6 months to see a cardiologist. And I'm not exaggerating. So you better hope you're not really sick. So then that means that people in urban Nebraska are waiting longer to see their doctors because people from rural Nebraska have to come here. So that, again, a lot of these key issues, there's lots more we can talk about under. I'm just going to touch a point on each one. And then when I say prosperity for all, so one of the things I say, and Wes has heard me say this, I don't know if I had to say Wes and Wesley, but I mean that Wes, is that I always say that I want to bring everybody to the table, no matter who you are, where you live, what you look like, or how you identify. We have something going on in Nebraska that I know goes on in other states where we're trying to make certain demographics feel less than. Prosperity for all means giving everybody the same chance, no matter who they are in Nebraska. And how we speak about it is as important as our actions. And so I want to make sure that we have the collaborative voices of a lot of people and not just a privileged few when we work towards these issues. So what I know is that 18 to 34-year-olds are really going to drive our state in the next few decades. And so we really have to work with them in order to make sure that they stay here in this state. That means affordable housing. That means, again, universal childcare. I said I was going to touch down on that later. That means good paying jobs. We have a petition right now to raise the minimum wage in Nebraska. And what a lot of people, and I've been explaining this to people all week long, is that people are worried about Social Security. One of the key factors that really affects Social Security is the fact that we really haven't raised the minimum wage in the United States for a very long time. You have people aging out, you don't have that pool of money going into Social Security. That's a crisis. So in Nebraska, we know how important it is, and we've done it before, we're going to do it again, to raise the minimum wage to make sure that people get paid a living wage. But part of being paid a living wage is also creating jobs that pay at that level. You know, I always talk about the old George Carlin routine, you know, where he basically says they don't really want the middle class to rise up because, you know, who's going to scrub their toilets and feed them their steaks? And And after this session, and I hope someone asks me the question, what happened this session? After this session, I really believe that we have leaders in our state that clearly don't want the middle class to ever rise up. And that, by the way, is why I always support labor and always have for as long as I can remember, because without labor, we wouldn't have a middle class here in the United States. So we need to make sure that we provide not only the resources that the 18 to 34-year-olds need to get a good education without college debt, to get good jobs, if they choose to raise a family, to have the amenities that makes them want to stay here. Childcare is a huge issue in our state, as I know it is in other states, and to make sure that they feel wanted in our state. Some of the things that have happened have come directly from our governor's office, and it is unacceptable. I know we can do better. So that was the very short key issues for my campaign. But I love answering questions, and as you can tell, I get very enthusiastic about my campaign, and policy makes me giddy. So anything you want to ask, I'm happy to answer.
I'll start because I typically try to do research on the states, that we're discussing in our Q&A. And I know Wes is obviously an expert on Nebraska since he lives there too.
Wes is so smart.
Yeah, he is. We love him and love having him with the organization, value him very much. So touching on a subject that I know is near and dear to Wes's heart, education. Your state seems like many other states, and like mine in Ohio, is facing a teacher shortage with the the rapid, it seems like, either retirement or just retreating of teachers leaving the profession. And it sounded like Nebraska was starting to do some things to try to either encourage people to start being a teacher or pursue it or stay in the profession, like loan forgiveness and maybe loosening restrictions, moving to Nebraska to be a teacher from another state. Can you just touch on kind of like what the legislature's done since you've been there for a few years now?
Yeah, I mean, we had some failures. Like I tried to get COVID bonuses for all the teachers, and that didn't pass because, apparently we're going to build like a giant lake. Something's more important than our teachers. So we had some failures, to be really frank, but we have tried to eliminate the praxis test. And a lot of people were worried about the bill that just passed because we had a senator that made an amendment in reference to the testing. But there was actually an Easter egg in that bill. I don't know if I talked to you about this, Wes, where the way it's phrased, it could be any test that you have to take. So it doesn't have to be praxis. They thought they were putting it back in, but the way that they did the language is that it's carte blanche. We can do whatever kind of test you guys want to do on that. So we can no longer, so that's one of the things we did, is that we're going to eliminate the praxis. They tried to eliminate it. The amendment was meant to put it back in, but the way the amendment was written, it could be an English test. It could be a math test. It could be ACT. It doesn't have to be the praxis, which is kind of awesome. One of the things that I've been working on, and I think it's going to be ready next year, is I'm big on interstate compacts. I've had more interstate compacts passed than any policymaker in the whole country. I'm a big fan because they're great for military families because they eliminate hurdles to employment. So I think we're going to have one for teachers. It's a little more complicated because the states have such different policy. And then we've also passed policy to remove hurdles. But what hasn't happened is anything that's financially beneficial. And another downside that's happened is that we have a lot of parents right now who, I think it's great that they want to be involved with their children's educations, but they are not teachers and they're not trusting that the curriculum is effective. And they're very misinformed about what's in the curriculum. So I like to have those conversations where I can say, I've looked at all the curriculums across the state that I've had access to, and none of the things that you're worried about are being taught in your schools. So I can say we've had a lot of good things happen, but we haven't had enough good things happen. And I think that we have a lot of policymakers that want to politicize our teachers. And I think that's wrong. We have teachers suffering from depression and PTSD. The suicide rate is high as it is right now in the healthcare profession. We need I say this a lot, we need our actions and our words to be kinder when we talk about teachers, and quit pandering to who we think is the majority, but are really just a loud minority. So I don't feel we've done enough in Nebraska, but I do give snaps to the NSCA. They've got a lot of good programming that they've implemented, and they've got some funding to help with training and some tuition relief. And Wes might be able to talk about that more. And I like that they're really working on recruiting minorities. That's why I think it's good that the praxis was eliminated, because the praxis really did discriminate against minorities. There was data that showed that there were gym teachers that couldn't become gym teachers because they couldn't pass praxis. There's a lot of, things like that. Like when you looked at the data, it was like that praxis needs to go away. So we're getting there. We're nowhere close, but before the pandemic, we had a teacher shortage. And I don't know about other states, but our state tends to get the information and they let it fester. I could be on this call until 11 o'clock tonight, midnight, telling you all the things that they've let fester. This is one of the issues they've let fester. And now trying to throw money at it isn't going to fix it. But I think if we change our actions and we change our language, it's going to help it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate all your advocacy for teachers. It's definitely needed, especially the language, like you said. Susan wants to know, do you support greater investment in the mental and behavioral health needs of Nebraska students? Why or why not?
Yes, I actually had a bill pass that several years ago. I have no concept of time, so I'm going to say several years ago, because I'm always moving forward. So I had a bill pass that so right now, before the bill was passed, if you needed a mental health day, if you were maybe suffering with depression or being bullied at school, or you having some type of incident that you were not feeling mentally well, you might say, Mom, I have a tummy ache. Mom, my head hurts. Can I stay home from school? Which isn't necessarily a bad thing if they get to stay home from school. But what I did was I added in state statute that they could take mental health days, because I feel like it's going to open a window of opportunity to discuss with mom and dad, or with the doctor, or with the teacher, or the principal. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling anxious. I need help. So that was one of the small things that I did for students, because I do believe that we need to better fund mental health. I also brought forward an interstate compact that allowed psychologists to practice across state lines with other states that belong to the compact, participate in telemedicine. I think telemedicine is a great thing, especially for our rural areas. We have trouble getting help out there because Nebraska, if we need to send like a young person who's suicidal to a long-term facility, we usually have to go to Wyoming. Nebraska owes hundreds of thousands of dollars to the facility we usually use, and they won't let any kids in right now. Like, we have children really suffering. So I think when you invest in mental health, you invest in so much more than just an individual. You invest in your community as well, because again, everybody has the right to feel well and be safe. And I am sick and tired of seeing people with mental health issues on the streets, in our prison system, in our jails. I feel like we can do better. We invest in things that I don't understand, that aren't for the overall good of all. Mental health is for the overall good of all. And it's, as you see, I feel personally that we've seen more shootings in the last year, more people that are having mental health issues. I think COVID has really magnified what we already knew, but it's gotten much worse.
Agree more. Could not agree more. So I was reading an article about the beef industry in Nebraska.
Uh-oh. All right.
I just thought it was interesting that Governor Ricketts declared the month of May beef month. But the article was talking about a new plant, a processing facility that was going to try to be opening in Gering. Is that how you say that?
Gering, Nebraska. Yep.
Yeah. Because a lot of cattle farmers or whatever, they have been waitlisted like 6 to 12 months just to get their meat processed. And so they're trying to open a smaller facility like that, just to stop to stop these people from having to go to like Wyoming or another state to get their meat processed, which then just comes back and is sold in Nebraska, but like the actual processing is done out of state. Is there any type of initiative like that you could do when you're elected as governor or from the Senate now that could help facilitate like smaller processing places like that?
Well, actually, we've already invested in that. There's been both state funds and ARPA funds that have been given to that area. People really need to understand that in Nebraska, we actually have more cows than we have people. We have just under 2 million people, and people always laugh, but it's true. I mean, if cows could vote, the world would be very different, wouldn't it? So you know how I say ag drives our community, cow calf operations, cattlemen, it's really important. But what's happened, not just in Nebraska, and actually President Biden's actually done a really good job on this, is that they identify that these big companies have merged and made a conglomerate and made it hard for our cow calf people and our cattle people to actually make a living. So they're not making anywhere near what they made a decade ago. And part of it is because of the processing. So if we can do that in Gary and maybe another community, that would be really beneficial. And then there's gonna be more money in our folks that do cows, cattle in their pockets. And that's gonna be great for our economy. So yeah, Nebraska's already invested in that. We can't not invest in cattle in Nebraska or our economy would go in the toilet. So ag is so important, from the corn that we make ethanol out of to the, believe it or not, we're like big producers of beans in Nebraska. A lot of people don't know that. We even have potatoes in Nebraska. You'd be surprised what's grown. Hemp is a recent crop that's been growing in certain areas in Nebraska. It's not statewide, but we're getting there. And it's because some people don't know the difference between marijuana and hemp. But yeah, we're definitely making inroads. We've definitely invested in that. It is definitely needed. And I actually look forward to seeing what President Biden is going to do. We need to make sure that when meat comes from other countries, even if it's processed here, that it's clear that it was not from the United States. Things like that affect our farmers, our cattlemen. So we need a product of USA labeling on, and we used to have it, by the way, on any meat that's processed and grown in the United States, because we got to protect our home front. That was a long answer, sorry.
I was very surprised to see that you were the leading exporter to like the European Union, Israel, Kuwait, like some pretty large areas.
Yeah, we got some good beef
in Nebraska. Exactly.
We got lots of land for the cows to graze on, and we have a lot of smart, we have a lot of ranchers. My lieutenant governor has a ranch.
Okay.
And is a cattleman. He's an independent cattleman, so it's a smaller independent cattleman. And he is a fourth generation, I think, third or fourth generation, which is kind of awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Tracy commented that your values first approach sounds like the way Mayor Pete approached his race, only to be discounted by some in the media for not forming detailed policies first. How does the media react to your approach?
So when I talk about, and usually when I do a meet and greet, it's an hour and a half. So I talk about how we're going to do all of these things. But one of the things that I can say right now, so I don't have to talk to you for an hour and a half, is that we're going to do all this with strategic planning. I don't know about your state, but our state doesn't have a strategic plan. That means they're really just writing checks. So what I envision and what I know we can do is that we're going to travel Nebraska, and we're going to go to north, south, east, west Nebraska, and we're going to say, what's important in your part of the state? What are your priorities? And of course, we're not going to be able to meet all the priorities, but we'll know what's important to them. Then we'll get the departments together. We'll get the nonprofits together. We'll get education together. And we're going to say, what's important to you? How can we make these things happen? How much is this going to cost? Can we afford it? What's our path to success? And because a business plan, a strategic plan is a living, breathing document, we will revisit it every year, and we'll go over our goals, and we'll measure what we treasure. It's like, we've been able to accomplish this. How did we accomplish this? What can we do better? What can we do differently? What did we not accomplish? How can we tweak it so we can keep it moving forward? Then our budget is going to mirror those goals and mirror mirror what we want to accomplish. And what's cool about it is that our citizens participate in it, and they're going to actually know how we're spending their tax dollars, which is kind of crazy, right? I know, right? It's such a simple thing, but we don't do it. And you know why we don't do it? Because we think that we only have to give out as much information as is necessary and nothing more. And I think what's wrong about that is that's where the the theories about government being dirty, or government not working, or we feed into those conspiracy theories by not being transparent. And so I can say the media for me has actually been, I think, and maybe someone's seen something else, but it's been really good for me, because I've been very pragmatic, come out from the very start talking about solutions and not just the silly rhetoric that everybody else is talking about. But that could change. But right now, I mean, to put in perspective, when we talked about workforce at one of the forums that we did, right now my opponent won't debate me, but he did do a couple forums before he stopped debating. We were asked about workforce, and I walked through, like we just talked about, and how we're going to achieve it. And his response was that had we not had so many babies that were aborted in Nebraska, that we wouldn't have a workforce problem. So we're very different, and he believes that, and I respect his opinion. I don't have to agree with it. He feels very strongly about that. That's okay. But for me, I always look at things as a pathway. We start here, how do we get to this point? And if you hear me talk on issues, and you kind of hear me do that now, right? Like, I want you to know everything about the issue. I want you to see what's in my head and how we're gonna get to that point, how we're gonna be successful. And I've actually, with one exception, which is a particular radio station in town, I've had really good luck with media. But I've been around a while too. So I think that's been a benefit for me, having served in the legislature, having served on city council. And I've always been very open and transparent and available.
I think that's fantastic. And hopefully that continues, definitely. So your opponent is it Jim Pillen, is that right? So I was looking at his website and I saw the Pillen playbook, and I kind of maybe inwardly cringed a little bit, but it sounded very similar to many other GOP playbooks, or values or whatever that you see very strongly around the country. So they all seem to be drinking from the same pool, meaning their messaging, which is not surprising. And he talked about stuff, and he used language like the left being radicals and socialist, opposing the Equality Act, banning abortion completely outright, bringing God back into schools, fighting the radical transgender agenda, yada, yada, yada. What is your plan to combat that agenda?
I don't know if I have to combat it. I mean, I think I just have to keep telling
the message truth against it. Maybe
my messaging again is everybody needs to come to the table. I mean, we can get into the weeds and say, with all due respect, if no matter how you identify, you're probably a taxpayer. We can go that direction too. If you pay taxes, you are entitled to the same rights that somebody who identifies as heterosexual has. I mean, there's so many ways we can look at it. For me, it's about kindness and compassion, but we can get political about it too and say, listen, you're a taxpayer, you deserve that. But a lot of what he's talking about shows that he doesn't have a clear understanding of the Constitution, both our federal Constitution and the Nebraska Constitution. And I think that that's really one of the competitive advantages that we have between the two of us, is that I have a clear understanding of how government works, having been involved with multiple levels of government, which we're a Dillon's Rule state, so that's actually really beneficial for our executive branch. Having that keen understanding is one of the reasons that I actually have a solution to our high property taxes, which is huge in Nebraska. Our property taxes are crazy and have been for decades. And everybody it runs promises to lower property taxes, but nobody ever tells you how. But I know how, And Wes knows, he's heard me talk. So, how I run campaigns is I don't fight against my opponent. I don't need to do that because I feel that when they message like that, that they're setting the foundation for who they are and what they stand for. So that gives me the opportunity to set my foundation, saying who I am and what I stand for. And what I stand for is equity and equality. What I stand for is that everybody has the right to be at the table. I don't care how much money you have, how much money you don't have, you've heard me say it a bazillion times already today. We aren't going to bring God back into school. No matter what I believe, what you believe, that's okay. But it's not our job to force what we believe onto other people. That's why we live in a democracy. That's why we live in the United States, because we have the right to believe what we believe, but we don't have the right to force that down the throats of other people. That's not the American way. And I think that that's what people have forgotten, right? They talk about, we just had Religious Freedom Month proclaimed. We already have religious freedom in Nebraska and in the United States. And again, I talk a lot about smoke and mirrors, right? What is that really about? Well, if we create fear in certain demographics, then it won't matter what the issues are. They're going to vote against their own best interest. And so we just have to be pragmatic and honest and stick to what's important. If you look at the issues I run on and the issues that my opponent runs on, my issues are really issues we talk about every day. They're kitchen table issues. And if I talk about something, I tell you how I'm going to do it. So I'm not waving an American flag. Although I'm very American, I'm not preaching to people. I'm not terrifying people. I'm saying, hey, we have problems and we're going to fix it. And this is how we're going to fix it. And we're going to do it together. I mean, how exciting is that? Right? Especially when you talk about the rural, try that again, rural, urban, you get rural when you put it together there, divide. I don't ever see that, but I know people feel that. If you are bringing folks to the table to plan the future of Nebraska, they're going to feel a lot differently, aren't they? So, but yeah, it's I have to be really frank. He believes that, and that's, yes, it's rhetoric that we're seeing in other states, but he believes that. And so I have to say, I give him credit for standing behind his values, but I don't feel that those are the values of most Nebraskans. And I feel that he has the right to feel that way, but not the right to force other people to feel that way.
I think that's a pretty strong conduit running through a lot of issues in America right now. Absolutely.
I would concur. Yeah. And it's sad. It makes my heart hurt.
I agree completely. Tracy said Massachusetts, where she lives, has recently passed law that people being released from rehab must be released to a family member so they don't head right out for a potential fatal fix. Does Nebraska have such a bill, or should they?
Yeah, they should definitely have that. And I know that there's some unwritten policy that they do that, but I don't think it's in statute that I'm aware of. I'd like to say I know everything about state statute, but I would be fibbing if I did that.
Thank you for that answer. Appreciate it. I have to say, I love your social media post that you're going around all the towns and taking photos of the yard signs or the signs in people's windows and posting those. So and I know it's been a big part of your campaign, getting out to the rural areas that maybe haven't seen a Democrat in a very long time, if ever. What is your focus and how are you tackling that?
So yeah, like I talked about a little bit before, is that if we shore up the votes in the 3 largest counties in Nebraska and we can get Dems out, Dems don't like to vote in our state in non-presidential years. I don't know about other states. And it's a problem. We really need them to come out and vote in non-presidential years, not just for what's on the top of our ticket. And we have some great races at the top of the ticket, but for our down ticket folks too. But for me is that the congressional district that's out west, all we need to get is 35% of that vote. So we're not going to get it from like one town. We're going to get a little from here, a little from there. We're going to be cherry picking throughout the state, but we only need to get basically 10% more votes than the previous candidate did. And that's not that hard. It just takes a lot of work. So we're out canvassing, we're making phone calls, we're writing postcards, you name it, we're doing it. If you don't want to do any of those things, we'll let you lit drop. I hate lit drops, but we'll let them drop and dash, and that's okay. We always try, in all of my campaigns, I've always tried to do at least 3 contacts to every voter. A little bit harder statewide, especially since we're very underfunded. And one of the reasons we're underfunded is that nobody believes that a Democrat can win a statewide race. Nobody has hope. They've lost that hope. And it's really sad because people have been begging for a viable candidate. And here I am, right? Proven that I can win in a highly Republican area 4 times. Absolutely. Energetic. I mean, when we go out to Western Nebraska, as you saw, because you follow me on social media, we do like 9 to 10 communities in 3 days. We travel over 1,000 miles. And unlike other people who are out west also campaigning, I don't have a plane. You know, we're driving in my 2006 Jeep Commander, you know, which I'm not going to get rid of till this campaign is over, because I'm not going to get a vehicle and trash it driving all over Nebraska. But it just, we can do this. We're working so hard. As you know, you follow me on social media, and I don't even get up half of what we do because I do. That's the other thing. I do all my own social media. So the TikTok videos that you saw, I'm learning. The Instagram, I have all these fun ideas. I just never have time to implement them as part of the problem too. But I like to do tongue-in-cheek things, you know, like my last campaign, it got so dirty, like, and I never go dirty, ever. I tell outside organizations, if you go dirty, I'll never work with you again. Don't go dirty. We can win this without being jerks. But I had so much I think there's like 30 giant postcards that came out, and the last like 30 days from my opponent. And the worst, the TV commercials are like, Carol Blood wants to let pedophiles out on the street, or, you know, I mean, just like horrible stuff. And it's always the voice, you know, so you have to be scared. And I do that to be a little silly, to make fun of them, by the way. So we did a video called Reduce, Reuse, Recycle. And it was like things that you can do with negative campaign ads. And it was like, you can scrape gum off your shoe. You can pick up dog poo. And we actually used the cards that were used against us. You know, you can fill a salt shaker. You can pretend your bicycle's a motorcycle. And we sang Born to Be Wild in the background. And then we had like a little toy garbage truck at the end that said, you know, whatever you do, just remember, reduce, reuse, recycle. And that got almost, last I looked, which was a long time ago, it had like between 25 and 30,000 hits. Yeah, I know, right? So sometimes we just like to be silly.
Yeah.
You know, because I think candidates, you know, especially certain types of candidates, take themselves way too seriously. And I think it's better when we like kind of talk to the masses in a way that's, you know, hey, we don't take ourselves as seriously as maybe other folks do. We take policy seriously. We take what you want done seriously, but the campaign stuff is actually kind of silly. And I think it's okay to make fun of it.
I agree. I agree.
That was a long answer. I give long answers. Sorry. I'm a very visual thinker, so I like got to see it through. So
I saw, was there a special election recently, like in the last week or so, for the US first congressional district?
Pansing Brooks and Flood, they're both served with me in the legislature. And Senator Pansing Brooks brought in more votes. And I don't know off the top of my head how much that was, but then any Democrats done in that congressional district for a very long time. Yeah. And although she did not win the special election, I feel like she's working towards the actual general election. And I'm hoping she concentrates more on rural areas, because that really was what happened, is that the other senator did better in rural areas. And rural areas traditionally do vote Republican, but mostly because Dems don't get out there. I can tell you that my signs are in a lot of Republican yards right now. And they always are when I run. Because when I make a promise to a citizen, I follow through on my promise. And so you build that momentum, you build that reputation.
It sounded like she was really excited that it was like less than 10%. Like they expected it to be a blowout for the Republicans, and that she like got so many votes that she was very, very surprised in a good way.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's positive momentum for the rest of the state, especially for your campaign and others down ballot.
I hope so. And again, you know, I think it's going to come down, we're going to work really hard, but it's going to come down to money. If I don't raise, you know, another $200,000-300,000, we're going to end up coming to a screeching halt. So we're working on it though.
I did see that the current governor is trying to get an initiative passed or get it on the, is it on the November ballot for voter
ID ballot?
Voter ID being required for voters.
So it's funny story about that.
And that his mom was the biggest contributor to that campaign.
Yeah, all but like $1,000.
Right.
Yeah, and the senator that's running the initiative is a senator that he appointed. She was 22 when he appointed her to the legislature. So funny story. I had to run an errand because I had a meeting, and I was in a strip mall in Omaha, Nebraska, and a gentleman walked up to me and said, "I'm with the state of Nebraska, and I have a petition here in reference to voters' rights." Now, the guy was clearly not from Nebraska and did not know I was a state senator. And I said, "You are clearly not with the state of Nebraska." I said, "And this petition that you have, as a young, proud Black man, you should not be doing this petition, because the only purpose of this petition is to water down the Black, brown votes, people with disabilities, and our senior citizens here in Nebraska. You should go and work on the medical marijuana petition." And then I reported him to the Secretary of State and the person who was doing it with him, because what's going to happen, and I'm not the only person they did this to, there was a Republican senator, they were going door to door getting these petitions signed. They lied to her too. So there's been a sitting and past senator who have been lied to. So the way the laws read is that if indeed they find that there's fraud, that entire sheet of that person is eliminated. And this is the same organization. I think it happened in New Jersey. There's been 2 states of this organization. It's like Ventura Industries, I think is what it's called. It begins with a V. That there's actually been people whose petitions have been found null and void because there's been fraudulent signatures on it. But we've managed to get video, and I wasn't like, I was minding my own business. I wasn't like out to get these guys. I did my job in government where we never let those bills out. So that's why it's going to the ballot, but it's going to get challenged in court. I have the license plates of the person who lied to me. And actually there was an investigation by the State Patrol. I don't know where that's at, but we know that a lot of these signatures are going to be invalid, are not going to be valid. And they're not going to be valid because apparently these people were trained to lie and say they were with the state of Nebraska. They were trained to say that it was voters' rights, not, God dang it, petition. Sorry, it's late in the day. And all other kinds of shenanigans. Like somebody offered, they're like, they went up to the medical marijuana petition people and go, "If you sign mine, I'll sign yours." And they're not reading it to people. We have videos of people like, "Well, just sign it." They're like, "Well, is there anything else you're supposed to do?" "Yeah, you just sign it. Here's a pen." So you have to read, I don't know about other states, but Nebraska, you have to actually read the language every single time. Medical marijuana did a really good job of that. Voter ID, not so much. And there's some other petitions that also aren't doing it. And so they're going to have to answer, I'm guessing, in the courts. So I'm not sure that that's going to get on the ballot. If it does get on the ballot, it will likely pass. I always tell people when they compare it to, like, you need an ID to buy alcohol, you need an ID to get a plane ticket. It's like, well, yeah, because there's fraud. We know there's fraud when people write checks. We know there's fraud when people try and travel and change their identity. You know, we know that there's fraud. In Nebraska, we don't, unlike some states, we don't have any verified fraud. So they're trying to fix a problem that doesn't exist. Again, smoke and mirrors. So yeah, you think about the magnitude of money they've spent on it, you think they would have done a better job of hiring. So I know, right? What the funniest thing is though, they're trying to fix fake fraud with real fraud. That's crazy.
That is crazy. Absolutely. Susan wanted to know, what are some environmental issues in Nebraska that you're facing? For example, do you have tree loss due to insect damage or reduced water opportunities due to any weird things?
Yeah, so this is an opportunity for me to talk about Mead, Nebraska. And if you guys have time, I encourage you to look into it. We had something called the Alt-N plant. I've been a very loud supporter of the citizens in Mead, Nebraska, because our state, again, screwed up. So we have ethanol plants that are really good stewards here in Nebraska. But then we had Alt-N in a community called Mead, Nebraska. The Alt-N plant used neonicotinoid coated corn. In fact, they bragged about the fact that they took in from 6 different seed companies waste corn that was coated with neonicotinoids, which are banned in other countries, by the way. And they made ethanol, which was great for them because they got the seed corn for free. Those companies had a dump site for it. They made ethanol, and then they had something called wet cake. So the wet cake product, when it is not full of poison, is really good to put on fields, right? Because it's high in nutrition. It's a really great byproduct when it's not coated seed. What this plant did was made ethanol with neonicotinoid coated seed, and then had so much wet cake that they couldn't dispose of. It was a pile as big as the Nebraska football stadium. I'm not exaggerating. Please Google this. You guys have to look at it. The Guardian's done a great job on it. There's Lincoln Journal Star. Read this story. Nebraska cited them 12 different times over the years. So it'd be like you get stopped, you're driving drunk, cop stops you, and they're like, okay, you're driving drunk, don't do that anymore. And then, 12 times later, don't do that anymore. And meanwhile, you've killed all these people. So what this wet cake pile did was, it was in the snow, it was in the rain, it was in the wind, it went down into the ground, it went down into the air. It smelled like the cross between a rotten egg and a rotting body, right? The whole town could smell it. I was there for just a couple of hours and I was sick for several days, like migraine, my eyes watering. It was just disgusting. We had the canary in the coal mine, which is, we have a research center there, our university does. The bees were literally dying and we knew something was up, but they didn't know what was up. It turns out it was the Alt-N plant. So the state finally closed them down, but after they closed them down and decided to sue them in court, which has been a year ago in March, they still haven't pulled the trigger on that because we're complicit and I don't think they ever will pull the trigger. They had a pipe burst. So it went into the surrounding ditches and the waterways. Just a few miles south of there, there's a pond that is now a dead pond called the Kaiser Pond. There's no amoebas, there's no fish, it can't be swam in. It's a family pond that's been there for generations. We also know that it's now entering the aquifer that's in that area and most likely going towards the Lincoln waterways. Lincoln is Nebraska's second largest city. So now they're doing the cleanup. I was able to get $1 million, but they really needed $6 million. And that was a whole nother story that I'll tell another time. But nobody wanted to support us getting funding to help these people. Our governor hasn't stepped foot in there once. I got involved, even though it's not my district, because the senator who lives in that area would not get involved. In fact, the day that I put together a town hall for the media to have people tell their stories, he was in Columbus, Nebraska with our governor talking about why sex ed in schools is bad. He's the one that was quoted as talking about the furries. Did you see that on the national news? Yeah, that's the same senator. And again, bless his heart, he actually believed that. You can't fault people for having bad information. I just personally wouldn't have said that on the mic. So that's been something that I'm still fighting for. But I put up a Facebook page called What About Mead, Nebraska? We've kept it in the news. We're not done with this yet because we know that neonicotinoids are likely going to cause For women that are trying to have babies, it's got fertility issues that are connected to it. We're really not sure everything that happens for people. We know about plants and animals because we found dead animals and dead insects. And by the way, their solution for the wet cake was they covered it with something called a polyshield, which is like concrete and fiber. So imagine, yeah, right. So that what they've done is they put it on top. There's still nothing underneath it. They're creating like a witch's brew. We don't even know what's going to happen under there. So the story is very long. I strongly encourage you to look up. It's spelled Alten and then Mead, Nebraska, Alt-N, Mead, Nebraska. So I'm very involved with. I'm also working with Alvo, Nebraska. That's got a tire fire issue. We just had the fires out west around Alliance. We have a lot of things that pertain to climate change going on in Nebraska. And I'm very concerned. We have Ovid Air Force Base here, and what a lot of people don't realize is that climate change actually affects their missions. So I have always been about water, the air. One thing that I like to remind, especially rural Nebraska, is like we talk about property rights, we talk about eminent domain, which is of course bad. Part of property rights is being able to breathe clean air, to have clean water, to be able to pick a tomato out of your garden and eat that tomato and know that you're not poisoning yourself or your children. The people who live in Mead aren't going to ever have that benefit because the state screwed up. We allowed it to happen. We even gave them, they were behind in property taxes, something like $500,600,000. And we gave them CARES money. I know, right? We gave them corporate welfare. It just, we combined two agencies that have to do with the environment and NDEE and NDEQ. We combined them into one. And that was wrong because so many things are falling through the cracks and we're not pulling the trigger because there's this weird thing in Nebraska where we support big business, which isn't bad, but we often make Nebraskans collateral damage because we do that. We don't seem to have this middle ground where we're putting Nebraskans first. We're always putting the businesses first. And ultimately, it is Nebraskans who suffer. And by the way, Mead, Nebraska was already a Superfund site from World War II. So it's a double whammy. And I grew up by a Superfund site outside of Hastings, Nebraska. Same thing. It's a Superfund site. I know, Wes, you lived there for a while, right? So yes, I care about the water and I care about the air and I care about the land. And I have always been a champion for all of those things. And I will continue to be a champion for those things because that's truly what property rights is about. And quite frankly, I feel, so our own personal yard, we're in trouble with the city right now because my son is creating a sustainable environment. We are a certified wayside for monarch butterflies. And we are a certified habitat, a nature habitat, which you have to meet certain criteria. But by meeting that criteria, we don't have like the green lawn. And so we're in trouble right now, which I never thought I'd say because I'm like, I always follow rules. We're in trouble right now with the city for trying to do a sustainable environment where you don't have to mow that. Like our house is the only house on the block that has fireflies, which tells you something, right? Because we give them an environment to live in. So we're trying to find that in-between spot where the city leaves us alone and they don't break my son's heart, who's put all this time into it. And I think they need to change their laws in the city that I live in, the ordinances, because more and more people I hope are gonna be doing this. So I try and practice what I preach, but I give props to my son. He's doing all the work. I just do the grunt work.
Sounds fantastic. Absolutely. I bet that's a sight to see though when the fireflies are out and the fireflies are there.
Because you never see fireflies anymore. And I don't know if you guys have noticed, but we are to a point where we're losing pollinators and that affects your ag. You got to have pollinators if you're going to have ag. And more and more people are spraying and mowing and we're contributing to it.
Yep. Agreed. I want to respect your time. And we'll have like the last two questions. One thing that I know that has been pretty prevalent around the United States, and it seems like it is in Omaha, that there's a lot of private equity-backed companies snatching up like swaths of residential property across, the city. And then when they come in and then they're, astronomically raising the rent or, whatever, what types of protections do renters have in areas like in the more city parts of Nebraska to protect them from those types of landlords?
Really not much. We have Senator Wayne and Senator McKinney who have tried to bring things forward more recently, but there really isn't much protection. But I think that's going to change, especially since that happened and was brought to light this year. I think you'll probably see more in the next session, which would start in January. But there really isn't a whole lot. Again, we tend to protect the people that own the buildings more than we, protect the people that live in the buildings. We do have some champions like Dave Pantos, who is running for county attorney in Douglas County, who has helped fight in court as a volunteer to help protect people from losing their apartments, losing their homes. But there just really isn't a lot of protection for renters in Nebraska. Sorry.
I think it's that way nationwide, because I think it's a more common occurrence right now that these private equity backed firms are gobbling up all the property, especially as a lot of people are coming out of foreclosure and that protection, that was in place during COVID. That,
I mean, and you have to be empathetic to property owners. So we're going to have to be, are we looking, again, it's where the conglomerates come in, right? You saw it. We talked about that earlier in the beef industry. That's happening in almost every type of industry across the United States. And it's always the citizens that are collateral damage. And so we got to start fighting harder for Nebraskans and for people across the United States on that. But again, though, when it's like an individual that owns a property, we also have to remember that that's how they make their living, right? So we have to find that middle ground of protecting Nebraskans, but also protecting the businesses that, not the conglomerates, but the individuals that own the properties.
Absolutely. I know that Governor Ricketts has been pushing for a new prison for a while. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because you did allude to the fact that there was a population issue with people in the prison system currently in Nebraska right now.
So I worked maximum security prison for 6 years. So I've had an inside view. I was the first pregnant woman to ever run the yard at LCC, Lincoln Correctional Center. So I worked maximum security, men's institution. And I can still take you down. I just can't catch you anymore. So we had prison crowding in the late 80s and early 90s when I worked there. And we built a prison and we still have overcrowding. We can't build our way out of this. Do I think we need new facilities? Yes, because the facilities that we have, the infrastructure, when we talked about infrastructure earlier, that's usually one of the things I talk about is that we don't take care of our own infrastructure very well. The Nebraska State Pen definitely needs a facelift. We definitely need new facilities because it's going to create a better environment for those that are in the facilities. But that's not the answer to prison overcrowding. The answer is we need pretrial diversion courts, right? We need to make sure that there's drug courts, veteran courts, and we do have some of those in Nebraska, and they're very successful. We need to slow down the pipeline to the prison system. You heard me talk about universal childcare, K through 14 education. Those are things that are going to help slow that down. But we need to make sure that nonviolent offenders have an opportunity to do better as opposed to incarcerating them. And our state, like many other states, we have a higher population of people from our Black and brown communities per capita in our prison system. And a lot of that is, and there's something that I was told once when I was on the yard at one of the prisons I worked at, and a young group of young Black men were talking to me, and they were talking about their court cases. And I said, well, that's part of justice. You go to court, you fight. And they're like, well, Senator Blood, for us, there's no justice. There's just us. And that always, I wasn't a senator then, sorry. That just came out. So I was a corporal. So that always kind of stuck with me ever since that time. And the more you look into it in Nebraska, the more you realize that You know, I look at the data. So the vast majority of Nebraskans want people to be punished when they commit a crime, and that's okay. But that same, almost exact same percentage of Nebraskans think we're rehabilitating them, and we are not. And so what's happened, and one of the reasons we're so crowded, is people are just jamming out without services. They still use an antiquated kite system. A kite is when you need some type of service, like I need to get into AA, I need to see the doctor, I need to see the mental health counselor. You have to write a kite. So think about it. If you're a short timer and the judge says you have to do this, this, and this while you're incarcerated in order to get out, right? In order to get good time. And then somebody who's in there longer than you both fill out the kite, but he does it first. He'll get in line in front of you, and you may never get into the groups that you want because they're short staffed, there's not enough groups. And so what happens is you end up jamming out. So there's several things, which means you do your whole sentence, you don't get any good time, you don't get any rehabilitation, and you go back out into the environment. And we don't really have the halfway houses once people get out on the streets. So most of them go back into the environment that sent them there in the first place. What I always tell people, having worked in the prison, is that, do you want people rehabilitated, or do you want people in there learning how to be better criminals? Because inmates have nothing but time on their hands to learn how to be a better criminal. And we can do better. And again, you talk about the people in there with mental health issues that are not getting the care they need and really don't belong in there. If they are nonviolent offenders, wouldn't you rather have them in programming and working jobs and contributing to the tax base? Because like it or not, the vast majority of the inmates that are going to get out are going to be your neighbors one day. And what kind of neighbor do you want? So pretrial diversion, we need the special courts, we need to find a better way to integrate them into the community. We have pockets of it, but we don't really have a good program. You look at other states that have done that type of programming, and they've literally closed down prisons and lowered the recidivism rate. But we have this weird thing where people are like, oh, we got to be tough on crime. Well, you're going to be tough on crime if you rehabilitate them, because then they're not going to go out and do worse crimes, right? People get desperate. If you get out of prison and you can't get a job, because we don't have the ban the box in Nebraska like they do in other states. So it's hard for a felon to get a job. Even with our market, like we have like 1 point something unemployment rate in Nebraska, right? They can't get jobs. So they commit more crimes. They never get rehabilitated, and it's just a spinning door. How is that being tough on crime?
So again, respectful of everybody's weekend and time. We always ask this last question to everyone. If you were stuck in an elevator with me and I was an undecided voter, what would you say to me to convince me to vote for you?
I'd say, Wes, since I know you, Wes, are you happy with how things have been going the last 20 years in Nebraska? Then why do you keep voting the same way? Don't you think it's time for new blood in Nebraska?